So we're going to have an introduction and presenting some of this work, but after that we have a really great and diverse group that will be able to discuss what that actually means for European countries. So Claudia Kempfert has joined us from DIW here in Berlin. Kristina Mojesova is from the Institute of Environmental Policy in the Slovak Republic. Welcome. Vicky Pollard from the European Commission. It's also great to have you. And finally, Jürgen Schneider joins us from Vienna. He's from the Federal Ministry of Climate Action there. So without further ado, Robert and Martin, my colleagues, will present their results now, and I'm really curious to see what you brought us today. Please.
Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm trying to just make this a presenting screen. Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Nicola. So we will present today the results from two simulation studies that were carried out for the Economic Survey of Germany and for the Economic Survey of the European Union. The study on Germany focuses on great sectoral detail and analyzes the trade-offs of different policy scenarios also across detailed economic sectors. And Martin will then present the analysis for the EU, which looks at different EU countries and how the EU Fit for 55 targets will actually affect economic and social performance. So Germany has set ambitious emission reduction targets and will need to triple the speed of emission reduction that has been in place since 2020. So this is quite an ambitious goal. And in this study here, we will use a multi-country and multi-sector static computable general equilibrium model, which is based on a model from Christoph Böhringer and Thomas Rutherford, which joined the team of the OECD in a consultancy project. We will analyze here the implementation of the EU Fit for 55 targets in 2030 on welfare and GDP in Germany and also the rest of the EU. We will look at the effects of different economic sectors and look at the trade-offs of these of different policy measures, but also at the distributional effects across households along the income distribution. The model, I will not go into the detail for the model because this would take too much time here. We want to discuss also with the panelists. So just three main points. So very important, this every model has to focus on a certain aspect. So it's impossible to model the reality. Then it's very hard to explain what is behind. So this model focuses actually on a static setting, so we don't have capital accumulation and like investment, dynamic investment. This allows us, but this allows us to focus on the trade-offs of different policy measures in more detail, because the resource constraints are actually quite binding. This is also a scenario which is not that unrealistic, as we now have the discussion in Germany that actually probably there will be some restrictions also on the possibility of adapting the public sector to increase investment. So this is one important feature. The second important feature is that production factors are mobile within regions, but not across regions. And the third main feature is that the emission reductions are implemented with endogenous CO2 prices. So we have kind of carbon budgets. The emissions have to be reduced until 2030, and this automatically increases CO2 prices. And how can emissions be reduced in the model? There are three different channels. Fuel switching, so you can substitute for each other. So some fuels have lower carbon intensity than others. Gas is a lower carbon intensity fuel. Then the second channel is fuel non-fuel switching. You can substitute fossil fuel in production for electricity or other production inputs. And you can also, third have direct energy savings through production and consumption activity reductions.
But sorry,
yeah?
I think your screen is frozen and we cannot see the slides.
Yes.
So do you want to take it down once, put it up again, and then perhaps that works, and otherwise we'll handle them for you.
That's a problem in the OECD in general. The IT is really not very good. So
I think that's the solution. Sorry to interrupt, but people are asking questions already.
So now
you could put, well, go to from beginning.
Yeah, I go again. And then maybe I close the laptop because it worked the last time with closing the laptop. Do you see them now?
Well, we see them, but not the presentation. No? Did you click on from beginning? Sorry for this.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it seems to be slow.
The internet is very slow in the OECD headquarters. Yes.
Here we go. Yeah. Okay, now you can go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, I see it. I hope everybody else can see it.
Okay. So that was the model background. So we have these emission reduction targets are implemented until 2030. And what are the different scenarios that we model? We will have one main scenario, which is called also the reference scenario, where we try to model the current institutional framework and also the recycling of carbon price revenues that is actually at the moment implemented. So we will have two trading systems. We will have the EU emission trading system, which works for the ETS sectors, which is mostly the energy intensive and trade intensive production sectors, including the energy sectors. And we will have an emission trading system or like a carbon budget for the EU effort sharing regulation sectors, which is all the other sectors that are not included in the ETS. We will have a unilateral emission reduction in the EU. So the EU will reduce its emissions according to the Fit for 55 target. But the other non-EU countries, which in our modeling exercise here are the US, China, and the rest of the OECD, and then the rest of the world, they will not have further ambitious emission reductions. So they will stay on their path that is projected in the benchmark. I will explain this in the next slide. And third, we are modeling the output-based subsidies that are currently in place. So we have rebates on emission allowance payments to the ETS industries, which are currently done, except for the power producers that don't get these rebates. And the rest of the carbon price revenues that are collected, they are transferred to households as lump sums. Then we will have a set of scenarios where we look at measures to support industries and address carbon leakage. One is the introduction of a carbon tariff. Then we will also extend the output-based subsidies to other sectors to see what are the effects of these measures. And we will have a multilateral abatement scenario. I will not present you results to all these scenarios. I just wanted to introduce that so that you can maybe look up further information and also in the economic survey and in the working paper that will come out soon. We also model an institutional reform of the ETS where we integrate these ESR sectors in the ETS sectors. And this is the goal actually at the EU at the medium to long run. So we can also look at what are the effects for the German economy. And we will also analyze the effects of national measures to decarbonize the power sector. We will increase subsidies for renewable energies, like use carbon pricing revenues for increasing subsidies. And we will also model a coal exit in 2030. Very important, all the results that I will present you now are always measured compared to a benchmark scenario, which is based on climate mitigation policies before the Fit for 55 target. So in 2021, the set of policies that has existed already has an effect on emission reductions in 2030. So we see here that the EU, given the policies before the Fit for 55 target, would reduce its emission by 44% in 2030. Germany already more ambitious, because they have committed to more emission reductions in the ESR sectors, they reduce their emissions more. And we take this benchmark scenario from the EU Joint Research Center baseline scenarios. And implementing these Fit for 55 targets means that in the ETS sectors, the whole EU will reduce emissions by 61% in 2030, which compared to the benchmark is only a reduction of 22%. And accordingly, in the ESR sectors, which is the effort sharing regulation sectors, the emission reductions are detailed for the EU countries by country. The EU as a whole will reduce by 40% until 2030, and compared to the benchmark, that's 13%. And you see that Germany committed to a much larger reduction than other EU countries. So they committed to a 50% reduction by 2030. So, okay. Coming to the results. Here we see the results for the reference main scenario. What we can see here is that for Germany, actually, the more ambitious emission reduction will lead to a larger drop in GDP by around 1%. I mean, we don't look at the commas, but around 1%. And the rest of the European Union will have a lower emission reduction. And the three main reasons for this are, first, in the non-ETS, in the ESR sectors, which is, for example, machinery and equipment, automobile, transport sectors, and consumer good industries. The emission reduction targets are more ambitious in Germany. So Germany already commits to 50% reductions by 2030. And second, emission intensity is already lower in Germany than in other EU countries, which means that abatement costs are higher. So it's the potential to reduce emissions in those sectors is already lower in Germany. That's why the CO2 price in these non-ETS sectors has to increase by much more than in the rest of the European Union. We see here that the carbon price will increase to 300 something US dollars, which is 270 something in euros. And this increases production costs and then also reduces output. And the third main reason is that in the ETS, which is the common emission trading system in Europe, Germany will also reduce actually its emissions by more than the EU, which is due to the large share of coal in electricity production. So Germany has lower abatement costs because coal is a quite emission-intensive electricity production. And if the CO2 price increases, Germany will reduce and phase out coal power relatively quickly, which reduces emissions, but also then actually reduces electricity supply, which you see here as well. So Germany will need to import electricity from other EU countries, will increase renewable energy production, which almost reaches actually the target share of 80%, so it's 77%. But this all cannot make up for the loss in electricity supply, which means that electricity prices will increase, which actually then is a problem for emission-intensive and trade exposed industries, which is the IT industries you see on the average. They will actually reduce output in Germany by -7%. But what is interesting, you have some industries among those emission-intensive industries that do not suffer as much as others. This is the chemical and paper products industries in our simulations here. And the main reason for this is that they have a considerable market power actually in international markets and can pass on some of the increasing production costs to foreign markets. So they can increase their export prices and will be less affected than others. And also some other non-ETS manufacturing sectors are benefiting from the situation, even from these more ambitious emission reduction, because production factors are leaving some of the IT industries, factor prices fall, and they can benefit from this situation. Okay. And a third main point on the results of the main scenario is that if we use this carbon pricing revenues for transfers to households, and we model lump sum transfers to households, so each household gets the same amount of money, we actually see that this more ambitious emission reduction has a progressive effect. So the poorer households that you see on the left is the lower income deciles. They actually are better off than before the more ambitious emission reductions, because the transfer to them compensates the negative effects on the expenditure side. So their purchasing power will even increase because of the transfers from CO2 prices. In general, not in general, but the expenditure effect, the blue bars, they are more negative for the poorer households because they consume a larger share of emission-intensive products and services, but the transfer actually compensates for that. Okay, so that is the main basic results. And now I will present you, okay, this is still the regional disaggregation. I think this is interesting, but we should not emphasize this because it's just a regional downscaling that we did here. We did not a regional general equilibrium model, but we used the national results and industry structures of states to downscale the results. And we see that the eastern regions, they will actually suffer from the more ambitious emission reductions because their industry structure is skewed towards emission-intensive industries. But there are no effects of general equilibrium here. So we could also maybe expect that due to a comparative advantage in wind power, because those states probably are less dense, so you could maybe build more windmills, and so they could also benefit from this transition. This is not modeled here, so and we can discuss this then during the discussion, I guess. And maybe to be in time, so that also Martin has at least 10 minutes to present, I will just present two scenarios now. So one scenario is the carbon tariff. So we introduce a carbon tariff that equilibrates the CO2 prices in the EU with the CO2 prices of import partners. So this is actually a protection for European companies that have to pay higher CO2 prices because of the more ambitious emission reduction. But we see that this policy is not necessarily a silver bullet. So there are some industries that are actually benefiting from that, chemical industry, non-metallic minerals or paper products. And this is mainly because those industries are focusing on the EU market. So they have a less strong export orientation than the other industries. And they, more importantly, even use less imported intermediate inputs. So, for example, the non-metallic minerals and the ferrous metals and non-ferrous metals industries, they use a lot of imports for their production. And those imports, they get more expensive because of the carbon tariff. And that's why they're suffering actually from this policy. So it's a trade-off. And I have another scenario I wanted to discuss with you, which is the renewable subsidies scenario. So when we use this carbon pricing revenues to increase renewable subsidies, this is actually good for the IT industries, for these energy intensive industries, because it increases electricity supply, reduces electricity prices, and this benefits those industries. But because this revenue, or this money for increasing subsidies needs to come from somewhere, and in our model, this will reduce the transfers to households. So that would be the Klimageld that is planned in Germany. So if you have less money for the Klimageld, this actually reduces purchasing power of households, private consumption, and affects the other sectors. So consumer good industries, transport equipment goods, but especially market services suffer from this. And to conclude, I have the last slide on the distributional effects of these different scenarios, and I will single out these two scenarios that I just described here. If you use carbon pricing revenues for renewable subsidy expansion, this is the scenario in blue, this line in blue. You see actually that by having less money for transfers to poor households, the emission reduction, or like the Fit for 55 policies, will lead to a regressive effect. So the poorer households will have less money for consumption, and the more richer households will benefit from those subsidies because those are mostly capital owners. So this scenario is actually the most regressive scenario. And the carbon tariff scenario, which is the red line, is actually a progressive scenario because you have more revenue from this additional carbon tariff that you can distribute to households with the Klimageld, and this will benefit the poorer households even more. And that's it. I leave it to Martin.
Just one question that came from the audience, Martin, before you. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but there was a specific question to Robert's presentation. which was whether the lump sum scenario is for Germany or for Europe. It's for Germany, right?
It's for Germany, exactly. Sorry,
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite intensive to organize this data. Like we use household survey data and match it to the CGE model, and we even have a feedback loop. And to do this for all European countries was not in the scope of what we did, but that can be done. So you can do that. Yeah.
Martin, now to you.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and thank you to Robert for the interesting presentation. I'm going to focus now on a simulation study that we've conducted for the European Union. So we don't have this detailed distributional analysis, but we look at the European Union and the larger and differences across the EU economies. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Can you see the presentation, Nicola?
Yeah.
Perfect. So the latest OECD economic survey of the European Union features a special chapter on the green transition. And this is joint work with the EU desk with Jan Strasky, Jean Chateau, and Antonio Michał, all from the OECD. And we discuss policies and to achieve the green transition. And in general, achieving the green transition is a very complex issue. So there's not just one policy lever, and there are many challenges involved. One of these challenges is that emission reductions need to accelerate to reach the ambitious emission targets. Another challenge is that agriculture and transport, as well as buildings, need to contribute more to emission reduction. So there are some sectors that need to do more. And the third challenge is addressing transition costs. And we have produced a simulation study, a paper, where we try to assess, to quantify this economic transition costs. So basically put a number on using a CGE model as done by Robert and his colleagues from Germany. Using a CGE model, we assess the economic effects of the EU Fit for 55 mitigation policies, of this new Fit for 55 package that was adopted or is still in the process of being adopted in 2023. And what we do is we compare the business as usual scenario, so the policies in place before Fit for 55, to the more ambitious Fit for 55 scenario. Our model projects macroeconomic, sectoral, energy and emission trends up to 2035. And for this, we do this for the European Union as a whole, as well as for 5 largest EU economies separately. This is Germany, France, Italy, Poland, and Spain. So we have a nice sample of Western, Eastern, Southern European countries. We couldn't do more because it's really time intensive to collect all the data on policies, but this is where we are right now. And maybe one important point to point out is we look at the economic costs, economic effects, but what we don't do is we don't look at the economic effects from limiting climate change. So on the benefits of reducing climate change, because our time horizon is very short. It's only 2035. So as said before, we compare the business as usual scenario or reference scenario, which is based on the 2021 policies. So everything before Fit for 55, where we have the EU emission trading system for industry and energy, and we have sectors covered by national efforts, the so-called EU effort sharing regulation. This is mainly national policies for agriculture, buildings, transportation. What we do is we also model the impact of COVID, the pandemic, and Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. And we compare this business as usual scenario to this more ambitious Fit for 55 scenario, which is basically a more ambitious reduction targets for 2030, a new emission trading system for buildings and transport and heating fuels, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, and a plethora of other targets and for renewables, for cars, as well as national policies such as the coal phase out in Germany. Our main results are that the Fit for 55 policies are projected to lead to a moderate loss of GDP per capita of 1% in 2030, compared to the business as usual scenario. So these are the implementation costs, if you want to say so, of the Fit for 55 policies. Countries with a larger emission intensity of production are projected to have higher income losses, be it due to specialization in industry, such as Germany, or higher coal reliance, such as Poland. Interestingly, our model shows that Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine did not substantially increase the economic costs of climate policies. This is because we front-loaded a lot of efforts. So without war, there would have been more demand for fossil fuels from Russia at a lower cost. And this would have meant that mitigation efforts would have had happened later on. And importantly, our study also shows that climate policy design can contribute to making the transition more cost-effective. For example, one lever is the carbon price. So a bit greater harmonization of carbon prices across sectors would lead to a lower carbon price and would allow to focus the abatement activities to sectors and countries where abatement costs are lowest, be it, for example, Spain and Italy, where it's cheaper to produce renewables. Another policy lever is using carbon revenues, as Robert described before. They can be used for subsidies, they can be used for lump sum payments. And in our model tells us it's most efficient to use them to lower the labor tax burden, because this would encourage employment growth. But we don't look at the distributional effects. And lastly, a CBAM, this carbon border adjustment mechanism, can help mitigate the loss of competitiveness of energy-intensive industries, but only partly. Maybe some more details. I will do it really briefly, given the time constraints. I mentioned before that there will be economic costs of Fit for 55 policies. This 1% of GDP in 2030 compared to the baseline scenario. And these costs are projected to increase. The further we go in time, the higher the economic costs. And by countries, we also show that, as before I mentioned, countries that rely more on industry, such as Germany, or countries that rely more on coal production, such as Poland in the last column here, will see higher real GDP per capita loss compared to the business as usual scenario. One feature of the current policies is that abatement incentives, the incentive structure is not really well aligned. So some sectors have a higher carbon taxation, while other sectors have a lower carbon taxation. So this is basically, we have this unequal treatment, carbon taxation, carbon pricing across sectors. And what we try to do is to see what happens if we have harmonized carbon prices across sectors and countries. And we show that this would help lowering the transition costs. For example, instead of a 1% point GDP per capita loss for the EU in 2030, we would have something between 0.5 and 0.8% point of GDP loss. So harmonizing carbon prices can lower transition costs. And this is because carbon pricing would be extended to sectors such as agriculture, which contribute to emissions, but don't really pay the cost for pollution. So here we see that in a scenario, we compare the Fit for 55 scenario, as it currently is, the policies, to a scenario where there's a uniform carbon price across sectors. And we see that abatement activities would happen more strongly in sectors that are not covered by the current ETS. This is mostly agriculture, transport and buildings. Another chart, which I'm not going to show, is we also did the same for countries. And we see that abatement activities would happen more where they're cheaper. This is Italy and Spain, where it's cheaper to produce renewables. And the last slide is on using revenues. This was the second policy lever, which I mentioned before. Policy lever to reduce transition costs is we show that if the carbon pricing revenues are used by countries to lower labor tax burden, the GDP to capitalize GDP per capita would be the same as in our Fit for 55 scenario, but there would be strong employment growth. So to sum up, there are going to be moderate losses of implementation cost of Fit for 55, but there are ways of policy to address this transition costs, and we discussed this policy actions in or policy recommendations in the EU, in the latest EU survey of the OECD. And one of the recommendations is, for example, to expand the coverage of emission trading, including, for example, large agriculture producers, and most importantly, phase out fossil fuels subsidies or tax exemptions, because this is what we've seen before, that some sectors have really strong exemptions and you just have this unequal treatment or unequal carbon price. Thank you very much for your attention, and now I'll pass on to Nicola.
Yeah, Martin, thanks. We already have a specific question about your presentation, which is about the harmonizing the carbon rates, the carbon prices. And the question is it an explicit price, or is it this sometimes implicit carbon taxation, the carbon rate, so the OECD definition? I think it's the latter, right? But correct me if I'm wrong.
It is the later, exactly. So what we do is basically the contribution to emission reductions is 50% more or less by carbon pricing, ETS system, and another 50% by regulations.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and now let's two very interesting and a bit technical presentations, but with a lot of implications. And I think I'd like to dive into one aspect from Martin's presentation with Christina, who's not from Poland, but from Slovakia, and you correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I wanted to pick up on this finding that depending on how energy intensive your economy is, your losses of at least using CO2 prices as an instrument will be lower or larger. And I just like to hear that from you. I'm assuming that the Slovak Republic's economy is also quite energy intensive and perhaps coal dependent. So how does that play out in the public debate and policy making? That perhaps you may have to pay a higher price for this, or perhaps you can comment on that, Christina. And you have to unmute yourself, please. Can you unmute your, perhaps you're not. No. Oh, can you unmute yourself? No? No. I'm sorry. Sabine, can you help? Is she a host? Sorry,
it should
Christina,
work now. It should work now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Christina? No.
The problem is not on our side, but we heard her earlier.
Perhaps we can go on with another. She's a co-host, yeah?
Yeah.
Christina, I'll come back to you. It's too bad, but perhaps we can sort out the problem in the meantime. And well, another point I wanted to perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
okay,
here.
so I switched to my headphones now, so
Yeah,
this is better
great.
now. Okay, sorry for having these troubles. Anyways, to react quickly to what you were asking me. So first of all, let me say that I very much welcome this work that was.
No, you're muted again. Oh, we can't hear you. Lots of technical problems today. We'll try a little bit. No. Christina, let's come. Perhaps you can try with different headphones, and I'll come back to you a little bit later, and I hope we'll sort it out. Well, perhaps Vicky, as you are from the European Union, you can comment on that in a little bit. Of course, you're mostly heading the modeling unit, but of course, you also have insights into how these discussions play out. You know, do countries stress that a lot, that there are different costs depending on your starting point, or is that something that can easily be sorted out among EU member countries?
So of course, the costs are very, very important to member states and to us, and they're an important part of the policy discussion. I think it's important when using this type of analysis in a policy discussion to be very clear about what the modelling does and what the modelling doesn't do. I think the presenters have tried to do that, but I think, you know, clearly the more you go to a smaller level, the more the uncertainties will be, or more the assumptions will affect the results that you come up with. And for example, one of the questions I would have for the modelers is the extent to which you do model comparison exercises, you know, the different implications, for example, of looking at with these different types of models, do you get the same GDP effect? Because when we do this work, we get, you know, we're usually around 0 to a slight negative effect on GDP. But bearing in mind that we're using macroeconomic models, which are modeling the past and not the very ambitious transition that we have coming in the future. I think that was mentioned also by Robert in terms of the benefits or sectors which would benefit, which are not picked up in the modeling. And of course, there's all the impacts of climate change, which again, the presenters have mentioned, are not picked up in this. And so, you know, when you're looking, I think the EEA came out with figures for the last 2 decades, 650 billion euros in damages, 220,000 deaths in the EU over the last couple of decades, but that's increasing very, very rapidly. And that is not being taken account in this sort of presentation. So I think it's always very important to couch these sorts of results in the wider context. We also the European level, when we have these discussions, it's also in the context of new policy measures, so an EU-wide policy. So the fact that we do have EU-wide climate and energy policy and associated enabling frameworks is very important. The use of the revenues from the carbon pricing has been emphasized is essential. So the money that goes into that will be going in from the new ETS2 for buildings and road transport going into the social climate fund, that is essential. But also the large amount of money that has gone over the years into Article 10 to modernize the power industry, into the modernization fund for countries, in particular countries in Eastern Europe, or countries with a very with a big need to modernize the energy sector, and of course to the innovation fund, where it's a very important source of funding for new technologies coming into the market. So all that funding to ease the transition and reduce the costs. So I think it's important to present this in a much broader picture. But yes, of course, it does create a lot of concerns. It is very polemic. And I think what's important is that people understand the urgency of the action needed. We have huge implications for the economy. Of the figures from the EEA, I mentioned on the 650 billion costs from extreme events, only about 20% of those are covered by insurance, which means the insurance gap and the impacts on member states' economies as insurers of last resort is enormous. And so all of this needs to be factored in to the political debate and the debate with stakeholders and the public. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Vicky. And Vicky made an important point, right? That one, you have to compare a little bit different models, and perhaps Martin or Robert, you can comment on that, to which extent you did that. And of course, that many policies are not factored into these models, so should be taken with a grain of salt. But Martin, did you compare? I'm sure you did compare your modeling results with what was available more widely. I'm not sure whether you ran different models, but perhaps you can comment briefly on that comment by Vicky.
Yeah, do you mean them taking into account the climate damages?
No, I think she was referring at the beginning, right, at comparing different models.
But model comparison exercises, yeah.
So we had a nice presentation together with Jan Intveld, I think, who produced a new model for the European Commission. Our numbers are quite similar for the short-term horizon, 2030. There's a big difference, of course, in assumptions. When we model, everything is based on assumptions. So Jan Intveld, for example, as for the Commission, they assume learning and more high productivity growth because of learning, new technologies, clean technologies, which I would like to point out we do not do in our model. We are very conservative when it comes to that. It's difficult to model innovation. What we do is we just assume there's going to be an improvement in energy efficiency. But of course, we don't know. Maybe we will have a new clean tech revolution in 5 to 10 years.
Okay. With new innovations, etc., results might be quite different. And with that, I think with that comment, I would also like to turn to Claudia, because of course, one result in Robert's model at the beginning about higher electricity prices, right, for energy-intensive industries, that's very controversial here. And in general, there's a little bit the promise, okay, once that we roll out renewable energy sources and a much stronger transmission network and digitalization of electricity generation and transmission, then electricity prices will fall. And that's why there's this debate about having a bridging prices, sort of subsidizing in the transition energy-intensive industries. So, of course, all this rolling out of more renewable energies was not modeled in here, but perhaps you can comment on, the importance of that and how that will also influence perhaps support for this whole climate and energy transition.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much, Nicola, also for the invitation and the question, and also for the presentations of Robert and Martin. Coming also from a CGE modeling world in my previous life, it's always interesting to see how the models improve and the new results they are presenting. And with this, I have two comments on the models, and maybe we can dive into that later on as well if there's time. The first one I found extremely interesting is the results in showing, but first of all, a remark, CGE models are really good in showing the sectoral impacts, and this is why they are applied, and I really appreciate it that they are doing it. These kind of macroeconomic models we are using at DIW as well are not so much looking into this sectoral results, but most recently we have also done a study on the sectoral impacts. with the CGE model and came to quite similar results, especially with regard to the industrial impacts. And this is what I found extremely interesting, because we were interested in the CBAM impacts as well. And it's pretty much the same. So it's 0.2, 0.3% of GDP impact, which we saw. But the first remark was related to the trade-off of the lump sum revenues from the carbon pricing. On the one hand, on like this kind of Klimageld, there's some lump sum revenue to public households, or also revenue redistribution to the industry, and we see some quite interesting impacts. And there's also a policy debate whether or not to spend the money for this kind of public revenue like Klimageld, climate money, or which we have a discussion in Germany, or also to bring it back to the industry and help them with the transformation. That's another discussion we have in Germany right now, with a debate of the public deficit, or how to manage with the Climate and Transformation Fund to manage to spend the money in a right way. And here I found very interesting to see that there are negative impacts also on the industry side, if it's not spent, or if it's spent to the public side, and there's a trade-off between both. And here I would be interested to hear also a comment from the modeling point of view, how you assess this. And the other comment I had, it's a model for perfect competition, if I understood that correctly. We have done also studies in showing imperfect competition. The numbers look differently, then they're even smaller, and there are more benefits to the European industry if there's imperfect competition. These are two side remarks, Nicola, before I answer your question. Higher electricity prices, indeed, that's a point. Because we need the electricity, or a lower electricity price for the sectoral coupling. That means more renewable energy is cheaper, of course, because it drives down the prices at the stock exchange market. However, there are different kind of impacts also, or parts of the electricity prices which are increasing because of the infrastructure increasement, because of different kind of components of storage and everything that is needed in order to have a less volatile electricity system. However, what is also needed is low electricity prices in order to use them for the transportation sector, for example, like the railway system, or also electric mobility that is needed, and also for the heating sector in order to use electricity for heat pumps, for example. And this is important for the whole transformation. And this is why we have to look at this as well, how to get electricity prices down. We have done studies also on a model on a European level with a 100% renewable energy world. Right now, today, we are presenting another study and showing that this is not only feasible technically, but it also brings the energy systems costs down, because less fossil fuel is used. However, what is needed here is clearly lower electricity prices in order to really have a transformation that is electricity based. And that is the most cost efficient way of transformation, to use the electricity as soon as we have it. And then this is the most cost effective way, and brings substantially the cost down. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Claudia. And I'm going to pick up on that later, also letting the two modelers respond to your questions. But I'm very glad that Christina is back with us, and the picture is so good that I'm also almost certain that we have sound now. So I just wanted to come back to my initial question, and I'm not sure whether you were able to follow what was said in the meantime. So Vicky very importantly pointed out that, yes, of course, these differences in costs and starting points, etc., and ability also to smooth the transition are a polemic. But on the other hand, we have to take these models a little bit with a grain of salt, because there are many things that where they do not capture, and also depending on the model, you can get very different results. But still, your view from the Slovak Republic would be very welcome, Christina, and I'm very glad that you're back.
Yes, thank you once again, and I'm very sorry for these inconveniences. I really have not had this kind of experience with Zoom yet. So first of all, I would like to get back to the two questions you posed to me in the beginning of this discussion. And first of it was, if I remember well, how do we kind of perceive it in Slovakia, as we still have one of the higher energy intensive in both industries, and we are heavily industrial country, and how do we are thinking about this potential pathways towards becoming greener here. So to answer you this, I have to say that we are speaking from the point of view when we are getting kind of a lot of European funding as kind of a support mechanisms to achieve those targets. So I think that it might be kind of different story for maybe some more Western countries, but in our case, we are getting both the modernization fund. We are also getting, of course, as every member state country, the ETS revenues, and we are now thinking about how to best spend them. And on top of that, we are kind of rethinking how we should approach the social climate fund, which will start running in a couple of years' time. So in line with this, here the whole political debate or thinking is more in a way of how to use these funds along with the resilience fund. So this is kind of where we stand in the discussion. I also have to say that relating to the 2030 targets specifically set for Slovakia, we think that well, currently where we stand there is that if we kind of use those funds that were mentioned before, well, then we should be kind of heading towards reaching those targets on our side. But that's speaking like overall for the all emissions. Now it will be much more challenging to achieve the target outside the EU ETS, which is much less ambitious in Slovakia as compared to Germany, I have to say. We are only targeting to limit it by 22.7% as compared to 2005. So, but still, it will be very challenging to kind of set the good measures to get there, because as was, I believe, said before, these are the trickier sectors in a way. And then you were also asking about our energy mix, I think. Is that right? So here I have to say that we are in kind of a convenient position, because we are getting majority of our electricity from the nuclear sources, and it will continue to be this way in the coming decades, I would say. So here actually this is not of extreme challenge to us right now, and I think that even with completion of the two new blocks of the Mochovce power plant that we are currently working on, we will be able to get even more electricity out of kind of our plants. So here I think that we are kind of ready. And if I may use this opportunity also to comment on the work that was presented, I have to say that we will be looking at it more closely, because me and with our team, we are currently also working with a CG model, which is originally a GEMI3 model coming from our Greek colleagues, and we are working with this model to kind of also model the possible impacts of the pathway towards net zero in 2050. We are also doing this along with the energy modeling, where we are using sort of a compact primes model, and also are trying to incorporate the rest of the sectors, the minority sectors. So all that was presented here today is indeed very interesting to us, and we will be definitely reviewing it afterwards. I also can comment a bit on some of the results that I think that majority of them, especially regarding the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanisms, were pretty much in line with what we were getting. So that's that was good to see, actually. But we will be still kind of updating this. So that would be very quickly from me. And then, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Christina. And I can see we are really amongst modelers here. So many precise questions to how you actually did this. Martin, Claudia or Robert, Claudia had questions as to your precise modeling. So maybe you want to pick up on that before I move with a question to Jürgen.
Yeah, exactly. Just to emphasize again, yeah, these models, they cannot model everything. And we concentrated here really on looking at the sectoral effects and the trade-offs of certain measure policy scenarios on the distributional effects of households. So this is the focus, and for sure the green transition has a lot of positive benefits. And in the economic survey of Germany, we make that very clear. The whole chapter, which is also on reaching net zero cost effectively, the chapter starts in describing the negative effects of climate change for Germany and the high costs that this has. This is no question. But putting everything in a model in the end makes it very difficult to disentangle the effects and to really understand what is happening in the model. And we selected this topic of how to make the transition cost effective, most cost effective. And to come to the question of Claudia, so the model has some form of monopolistic competition, so it's not perfect markets. That's why we can also actually see that some of the German industries can pass on some of their cost increases to foreign markets because they have higher market power. So that model it's a very nice model that has been developed for 40 years by Thomas Rutherford and Christoph Böhringer, and it's actually quite a state-of-the-art model. And on the effects of the subsidies, so the trade-off between using carbon price revenues for the lump sum transfers to households or for subsidies for the electricity production or for renewable energy, the negative effects on the other industries, also on the not energy intensive industries, but less energy intensive industries, is explained mostly through the consumption side, because you have less money that you can actually transfer to households. And that especially affects the poorer households, which have a much larger marginal consumption Neigung, oh God, in German. So they consume more of their budget.
Propensity to consume.
Propensity, exactly. And so this has a negative effect on consumption overall. And these other industries, for them, this reduction in consumption is much more important. So those are final good industries. And that's why they're actually suffering then from this scenario. So you can really analyze this trade-off across industries and services and with this model.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so very important points to show also that models should not be taken at face value, but if you interpret them correctly, then you can really see the mechanisms that are at work. Also important, I thought, was Vicky's comment that, you know, of course, what's not in the model, but what can be very important is, well, in regional inequalities, regional funds from the EU or other measures that can help regions to adjust. But picking up on the actually lump sum transfers, Jürgen, that's something we discuss a lot in Germany, and I think you already have it in Austria, climate bonus. And my question to you is, how do you do it? Because here they always say, well, we really want to have it, but we don't have the mechanisms to do it. So how can countries that, because it seems to be a very potent instrument, right? It can really recompense those households that are hardest hit. So what's the experience with it and how to do it?
Thanks a lot for that question, and thanks a lot for having me in that discussion. But just let me start by two comments, more general comments, before I try to allude on your question. First comment, of course, in Austria, we're also doing economic modeling on our climate and energy policy. We have analyzed various scenarios, including them with existing measures, with additional measures, and those which bring us to our effort sharing targets in 2030. What we generally, well, I clearly have to underline what you said. The results really depends on the assumptions you're having. In particular, if you have revenues from CO2 pricing, how to redistribute them to households as we do it, partly to industry, and that's usually conditional. That means the money has to be spent for energy transition or climate measures. What we see in our modeling is that indeed with our scenarios which achieve Fit for 55, prices go up a little bit because we have a lot of investments. Nevertheless, we see additional GDP growth. We see additional employment because energy transition is a huge investment program, and we see that very consistently. There are no huge effects, but they are positive. We also see the progressive effect of our climate bonus. So second comment, and now I really have to take off my hat as a Director General for Climate, and I put on my hat as a Director General for Energy. I really have experience of the last 1.5 years. We have a fossil energy system. And we had 3 promises from that. It's sustainable. No, it's not sustainable. It's secure. No, it's not secure. And it's cheap. No, it's not cheap. Austria alone had a net fossil fuel bill last year of 18 billion euros. 18 billion euros. We alone spent 4 billion euros for a strategic gas reserve. We spent billions of euros to compensate for effect of a fossil not secure system. We all know we have the cheapest prices if we are not relying on fossil energy. So the really systemic answer to that crisis is to increase the switch to renewable energy, to go away from fossil fuels. There are risks that you usually don't model, but we experienced them in reality. We had sleepless nights, weeks and weeks last year to really secure that we can heat our homes in the winter. And we are just not out of the woods yet. We still are in the danger, in particular, the Central European countries. So that was my second introductory remark. On your question, I mean, we introduced the CO2 pricing basically for the effort sharing sectors. And not only building and road transport, but also for services, smaller industries. And at the same time, we introduced a so-called climate bonus, which is a per capita transfer to everyone who lives in Austria for more than 183 days. That means for the whole population. Which was a very ambitious project, and I think we had 10 months time from the political idea to do so to the full implementation. And it's a system where no one has to apply for, so without application. And we are using data from our central registers. About a little bit more than 80% of the persons get an automatic transfer. These are those persons where we have a combination of where we know where we live and we have the bank details. Not everyone falls under that category. So for 1.5 million people living in Austria, we had a transfer by postal service. We also had, had to do a lot of tendering and setting up the system. Nevertheless, 10 months, and it worked out very, very good. Very low transaction costs, very effective. And we compensate more than 1 billion euros in that way. But as I said, it's not the only compensation. And of course, in a transitional phase, we also support enterprises and bigger firms in their efforts for energy transition. And from my point of view, that's really without alternative. Nevertheless, I'm very grateful to the OECD because we clearly need to know what to do, but the question how to do it and how to avoid negative social impacts and negative economic impacts. And here I see your work really helpful, and thanks for that.
Thanks a lot, Jürgen. And before I move to your very important big picture comment, so can all renewable work not be cheaper and more secure in many ways? I do want to come back on the, elaborate on the climate bonus experience you just explained, and come back to Vicky, just to ask, well, even when just looking at the models, right? Some really nice features, and not thinking about big innovations, etc., but just, the effects of CO2 prices and what you can do with that. Some really nice features come out, like these restituting lump sum transfers to households, but also that things can be quite a bit more efficient, effective when you have a more comprehensive CO2 price, you get rid of fossil fuel subsidies, etc. So the results are there, but it seems to be difficult also to convey that to the public, or at least then to put it in practice politically. So in your experience as a modeler who tries to inform the public and looking at different reactions in different member countries, what needs to be done? Why is it sometimes so difficult to implement policies that seem so straightforward in some ways? Is it the technicalities of instituting a climate bonus, lobbying, whatever?
Well, I'm actually not a modeler, but I manage modelers. But I would say there's several levels. One, obviously, just a legal issue in terms of the role of, for us as a commission, as opposed to member states, a question of subsidiarity. And so there's a huge amount of variation in approaches. On tax policy in particular, I think, we don't have a competence at EU level to set taxes. And so there is a need to have unanimity to change tax policy. And that is why of the 13 measures in the Fit for 55 package, the one which is still in discussion is the Energy Tax Directive revision. All the others are adopted, which is amazing, right? Because in 2 years we have this huge package of measures which is there. So I think there's an awful lot which is there. And I think what we do is design policy to reflect the political context and where we have competence. So I think that's one thing, and I think we do it quite well. I think we really do our best. I think we've had a huge impact over the years in terms of mainstreaming. I think there's, for years we've been working together, climate and energy policies together. It's really paid off in terms, as Jürgen said, in terms of the response to the Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine and the energy crisis. It's really made us much more resilient. I think we still need to work with other parts of government to get a better understanding of the possibilities and the opportunities. So there's just a time element. We're doing things very fast. I think also with respect to fossil fuel subsidies and tax exemptions, a lot of these are going to groups which are considered vulnerable. The impacts of changing the system are a concern to decision makers, and so that slows the process down. I think there's a very, very strong case for the phase out of fossil fuel subsidies, but it's obviously it's taking a long time because of the difficulty in dealing with the impacts of that change. So I think we're making progress actually quite fast. It needs to be faster, but the challenge is really in the detail. And if anything, for me, as someone who works in DG Klima, we actually struggle with the time to address all the different aspects of climate policy as it's being mainstreamed. So all these different questions, our ability to engage with all our colleagues and all those processes as DG Klima with an oversight role is actually quite difficult because there's so much happening. So I think it's really a question of time. And I think studies such as these, the analysis, the detail of what's happening between sectors, the implications of different policies, the mechanics is important, because that's what makes the case. I think what we mustn't do is get stuck on the questions of the big numbers, which are maybe uncertain. What we and I mean, as I said before, we need to understand the wider picture. But it's really important is these analyses to help, especially colleagues in all those ministries and departments who are not dealing with climate full on, but are dealing with everything which enables the climate transition. I think that's the key now.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Vicky. And Claudia, I think I want to explore Jürgen's plea, basically, that where we saw the downsides of the fossil fuel energy systems, especially with the war, Russia's war in Ukraine. And of course, you're also a proponent of an all renewable world in some ways, and saying that it can be secure and cheap. But what are the pitfalls? How to manage the transition? How close are we? What do you think? What's lacking? And what are the main levers that need to be used in order to get there?
Yeah, thank you very much. And also, I completely agree with Jürgen. And this is also based on, we have done also a meta study in showing all the model results in all electric world with renewables is always cheaper. And this is what 99% of all the models are showing right now. It's simply that easy in the economic system points of view, that as soon as you have renewable energy installed, it's so cheap because you have zero marginal costs, and you can use it everywhere where possible with energy savings programs in the industry, but also building sector, where you use renewable energy in heat pumps, for example, for industry, but also for homes, for heating the system, but also in the electric mobility. As soon as you start to waste a lot of energy, again, as we do right now with the fossil fuel system, where we have a lot of energy waste because of not high efficiency rates in the fossil fuel system with the combustion engines or power plants which are based on fossil fuels. But if you start also in the full renewable world and wasting energy a lot by, for example, producing a lot of hydrogen, which is good on the one hand, we need it for the industry, but if you use it also for the heating system, as some people say or propose, or also for the transportation system in a large scale, like in an SUV, for example, it becomes less and less efficient. And then there you need a lot of renewable electricity, and this is less efficient, less cost efficient. And this is what you always have to look at, the different kind of scenarios and the decisions that needs to be made right now on the energy system. And this is why we always recommend not to waste renewable energy, but to use it as soon as you have it in a full electric world. And this is where I completely agree with Jürgen and others who said that, and also who are modeling it. What is needed for that? I mean, you always have to reduce the barriers for renewable energy, and there are still fossil subsidies. I mean, today the climate conference starts. They always discuss, and G7 in every country says, well, we want to reduce fossil subsidies, but at the end, also Germany and other European nations still have them. And that would be a low-hanging fruit to reduce. And the carbon pricing, which has been mentioned here, on the other hand, so to reduce the advantages of fossil fuels, increase also carbon prices, and reduce the barriers for renewable energy. I think these are the three most important aspects in order to get the full electric world with renewable energy.
Thanks a lot. Perhaps Martin or Robert, for this world where everything is electrified, of course, we also need a very much stronger energy transmission storage system, and also collaboration at the European level. Is that something you stressed in your studies? That's something where European countries have to work on?
Maybe if I may jump in here. It's a very good question. In our paper itself, we don't stress it that much, but in the EU survey, we have a whole subsection on this, and we discuss the issue of the need for further investment in cross-border transmission. Not all countries are yet where they pledge to be. And then there are also a lot of bottlenecks when it comes to grid planning, permitting. This is not an issue for the EU. This is really an issue for countries. This is not something EU can do a lot, actually, because it's on the responsibilities of countries. What we do in the paper is basically we look at, we assume that governments use revenues to also invest in electricity grids. So this will help GDP growth. But yeah, and we also assume that it's possible to fully electrify the economy. But right now we are not there yet. Actually, we need a lot of clean tech revolution when it comes to energy storage, transmission, more decentralized systems. Yeah.
Yeah. Claudia is pointing rightly out that we're close to the end now. I did want to ask one last question to
Nicola, can I?
Yeah, Robert wants to jump in. We'll be done in 5 minutes, I promise.
So we also did some sensitivity analysis, and we can model these input substitution at elasticity. So electricity cannot cost less be imported, so there is a cost to it. And if we reduce this or increase this elasticities, if electricity can be imported easier because these problems that Martin described are solved, then this has for sure a huge effect on the cost efficiency of the green transition. So the negative effects will be much smaller.
Yeah, and so now the discussion is heating up, but Claudia, we know that you have your next meeting, so don't. Thanks for being there, and thanks for enriching our debate. Jürgen, yes.
Just one thing I really want to emphasize, and I agree with you. I mean, the energy transition is capital intensive. That's for sure. But I completely agree with what Claudia says. I mean, what we need at this stage is technological clarity. Why? We need to keep the cost of the energy transition manageable. And if we really want to keep up 3, 4, 5 infrastructures in parallel, nobody will be able to pay for that. So it's, from an economic point of view, sensible to go for the most efficient system. And the most efficient system is usually the electric system. And I fully agree that national solutions are more expensive than European solutions. We have a common market. We need to make investments in our interconnectors. That's for sure. But as I said, we clearly know where to go. And now we have to find the best ways to do so, to accelerate permitting. I mean, we have the RED 3. We are also now discussing in Brussels to prolong the emergency regulation on permitting. So there are no excuses to go in that direction and really to loosen the brakes and go for it, which makes our economies more resilient. And it's also necessary to combat the climate crisis.
Thank you, Jürgen. And then just for one final remark, Christina, I wanted to turn to you. So that's because Slovakia, being a small country, of course, you know, expanding your grid and other infrastructure depends a lot also what neighbors are doing. So how important is that aspect? And perhaps also picking up on the remark that, well, on the one hand, you never know what innovation brings, but to some extent, it can be efficient to have some sort of directed technological change where you already have a vision which technologies might be more efficient. Does that play a role in environment and innovation policies in Slovakia?
Yeah, regarding the second question, I haven't really picked up such a discussion on the Slovak levels yet about like the directive about certain technologies. To be honest, I would definitely agree that it would be very useful to have something like this, but we have to wait and see, I guess, at this point. And going back to the first question regarding the interconnectors and the capacity for having better operated electricity markets and having the capacity to produce enough. As I mentioned before, here in Slovakia, we are working on some new capacities to be kind of better prepared for the electrification wave, so to say. And also from what I hear from the Ministry of Economy, from the colleagues, we are also on a good way towards being more interconnected with neighboring countries, especially because it's definitely true that we are very small in this regard, especially if we compare ourselves to, I don't know, for example, Germany. So that's really, you cannot really compare. So there, I think also the work is ongoing to make us more interconnected and to a certain extent more flexible also to be able to react and to kind of smooth out the waves. Yeah.
A final thought from a smaller European Union country. So Claudia is already gone, but I want to thank you, Vicky, Jürgen, Christina, and also of course Martin and Robert for the great debate. There was a lot of debate also in the chat. I didn't pick up on all of it. I'm sorry about that, but I think sometimes it was answered in written. Thanks a lot, and I think we have a lot to do, but these kind of models, debating the results can hopefully help to get some more clarity. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thanks a lot, and also thanks for your great work.
Thank you. Bye.